You know that moment when we feel like we need to stop and observe? That's exactly how it started. Any afternoon, blue sky, smell of bread baking in the bakeries on the street, and the hurried coming and going of people who seem to have the whole world in their hands. In the middle of this common scenario, there was someone who didn't seem to fit in. Small, slight, hair tied up anyway with an old elastic band. Clothes too simple for that avenue full of shiny windows. She walked slowly, with steps so light that they hardly made a sound on the ground. Each window that passed by was a silent invitation to a dream that she knew she most likely could not touch. But there was one store in particular that paralyzed his feet in the middle of the sidewalk. A toy store. It wasn't just any store. It was a kind of place that made a child's eyes get lost in magical universes, between dolls that seemed to smile for real and cars that defied gravity on the tracks set up in vibrant exhibitions. The girl leaned her forehead against the window, leaving a soft mark on the polished glass. Inside, new, clean, colorful toys spread a sense of celebration. She bit her lower lip, as if trying to hold back the whirlwind of emotions that threatened to overflow. It was like standing outside a castle, with the key right there, but knowing that I would never be allowed in. But that afternoon, she decided to break this invisible rule that life seemed to impose forever. He took a deep breath, adjusted the strap of his battered backpack on his shoulder, and pushed the glass door, which let out a slight metallic tinkling, as if announcing his arrival. The first step inside the store was almost shy, as if she was afraid that someone would send her away before she even stepped along. But no one noticed, or at least that's what it seemed. The girl slid her eyes through the corridors full of crowded shelves, as if memorizing every detail of a dream. It was impossible not to feel the transformation happening there, silently, inside her. A sense of belonging, even if brief, even if illusory. The smell of new plastic, mixed with candy sold near the checkout, invaded her nostrils. She closed her eyes for a second, allowing herself to believe that this world was hers too. Each toy on display was a promise of adventures that she had always imagined living, but that until that moment only existed in her secret thoughts, kept as small treasures. She slid her hand around the edges of a doll box that looked like a princess. She smiled to herself, a shy, restrained, but genuine smile. There, among overflowing shelves, she was not the orphan girl from a forgotten village. She was just a child among dreams, where poverty placed no limits and where decisions could still be made by will and not by necessity. The light that came through the large windows of the store drew golden spots on the lightwood floor. The girl followed these trails of light as if walking through a secret map, a silent journey towards what seemed to be a treasure hidden among corridors. Each step was charged with an almost sacred expectation, as if in some corner of the store she could find more than toys, perhaps a forgotten piece of childhood that difficulties had tried to erase. The hidden truth at that moment was that, for her, to look was already to live. It wasn't just seeing with the eyes, it was experiencing with the soul. It was building invisible castles, creating epic adventures, being a heroine of stories that no one else knew. And this ability, so pure and so rare, was what gave that afternoon a unique glow, impossible to capture in simple words. Between one corridor and another, she bent down to closely observe a small electric train. Her eyes shone even brighter, reflecting every detail as if they were engraving everything inside her to never forget. There was no hurry. There were no charges. It was just her, the train, and that magical moment. Moments like this are invisible to most people, but for those who carry dreams in their chest, they are everything. Behind the scenes of that illuminated store, however, something was beginning to move. Discreet looks, muffled whispers, and expressions that did not match the lightness of that silent journey began to form. Small details that would soon show that not everyone saw the greatness hidden in those who only dream. The impact her presence had was subtle but real. Some people looked away. Others frowned discreetly, as if her innocence was a nuisance in an environment where the value of things was measured in price tags, and not in the intensity of the eyes that admired them. It was as if the hidden truth of society revealed itself in small gestures, in the details that no one says out loud, but that are there, ready to be felt. The girl, however, still oblivious to these silent judgments, continued her magical journey between toys and dreams. Each colorful box, Each soft plush was an open window to worlds where difficulties did not exist, where decisions were not made by lack, but by the desire to be happy. It was impressive how, in the midst of so much opulence, the most powerful transformation happened without almost anyone noticing. The ability to dream, even when everything around me said otherwise. That afternoon, the real world and the world of dreams intersected in every step of that little dreamer. In every contained smile, in every careful touch, there was a story being written silently, away from the hurried eyes that saw only a girl in simple clothes wandering among expensive toys. But anyone who looked deeper, beyond the surface, would see something rare, the silent resistance of those who, despite everything, still believe in the beauty of life. And it was in this scenario, between the brightness of the windows and gray of the streets outside, that the story began to unfold in earnest. A story of choices, of mentality, of impact. A story that would reveal that, often, the greatest transformations begin in the most unexpected places, and in the people we least expect. But at that moment, while the girl was still exploring each shelf with eyes full of hope, without imagining what was about to happen, fate was already silently beginning to sow the next chapters of her journey. If this story has already moved you in any way, take the opportunity now to subscribe to the channel and continue following every detail of this exciting transformation. The girl was still dazzled, as if each shelf was a living page of an adventure book that she leafed through with her heart. Every doll, every building game, every soft teddy bear, everything was absorbed as a silent revelation, a promise that, in some corner of life, there was still room for pure beauty. She allowed herself, for precious moments, to forget the harshness that shaped her days, the lack of everything that most of her could not even imagine. But not everyone inside saw the same thing. Life sometimes opens up its hidden truth in the subtlest details, and also in the cruelest ones. Near the main balcony, a woman watched, too elegant for the casual environment of the store. She carried on her face the hard expression of someone who believes she has already understood everything in life, without realizing how much she is still a prisoner of her own invisible limitations. The impeccable pencil skirt, the high heels that echoed firmly on the polished floor, the hair tied in a meticulously fitted bun. Nothing about her was by chance, nor the icy look he cast in the girl's direction. For a moment, the girl didn't even notice. She was too busy admiring a dollhouse so detailed it looked almost real, with mini furniture, mini curtains, and a mini world where perhaps everything was fairer. But the employee, with her mentality shaped by shallow patterns, could not stand that presence that, to her eyes trained in figures and appearances, was a grotesque mistake in a scenario she was proud to keep so exclusive. She put down the clipboard she was holding, adjusted the shiny necklace around her neck, and marched over to the girl. His steps, firm and rhythmic, cut through the air like a blade. The girl, still lost in the enchantment, did not even see when the elegant shadow stopped next to her. He only suddenly felt the change in temperature in the environment, as if the air itself had become heavier, denser. It was then that, in a harsh whisper, cold as steel, the woman's voice was heard. "This is no place of the poor." The phrase floated in the space between the two like a stone thrown into a serene lake, brutally breaking the innocence that had hovered in the environment until that moment. The girl widened her eyes, surprised, not knowing how to react. For a second, he thought that maybe he had heard it wrong. But the employee's gaze, loaded with explicit contempt, confirmed that no, it was not a mistake. It was a calculated rejection, nailed without any delicacy. That speech, so short and so cutting, pierced the girl's chest like an arrow. It wasn't just about not belonging there. It was about being reminded, in a violent way, that in her trajectory, doors did not always open with a simple push. Some were locked on purpose, with invisible locks made up of judgment, arrogance, and a blind belief that worth is measured by what one wears or what one carries in one's pocket. There was a profound impact on that experience, more than the woman could have ever imagined. For her, it was just a course correction, a maintenance of the adequate order of the store. For the girl, it was a wound. One more, another invisible mark, hidden under the skin, that would shape his way of seeing the world, his future decisions, his way of dreaming, or perhaps of stopping dreaming. Those who observe from the outside might think that it was just an unfortunate comment, that children are resilient and forget easily. But behind the scenes of the soul, marks like this don't disappear so quickly. They become silent tattoos that influence every choice, every step of the journey yet to come. The girl did not answer. There were no words at that moment that could form, only silence. A heavy, heavy silence that said much more than any explanation could offer. She looked away from the floor, feeling as if her whole body was shrinking, as if she wanted to disappear in that instant. The transformation that took place within her was inevitable. It was no longer just about dreaming about toys. It was about beginning to understand very early the weight of the invisible barriers that some insist on erecting around others. The employee, satisfied with having done her part, turned her back with the same superiority with which she had arrived. Little did he imagine that he had just become a character in a story that would transcend far beyond those bright corridors. She believed she was protecting the store, but what really happened was that her small gesture revealed a tragic greatness, the inability to recognize the true wealth of people. Meanwhile, the girl was still standing, as if she were glued to the ground. His gaze, once full of life, now seemed lost. A silent struggle was going on inside her, between the desire to run away and the almost instinctive desire not to surrender, to resist, even if it was just staying there, even if it was just another minute. And it was in this hesitation, in this delicate interval between humiliation and decision, that something began to change irreversibly within her. The seed of true transformation is not born in comfort. It springs from pain, from revolt, from the deep certainty that we need to be greater than what they try to make us believe we are. In that moment frozen in time, the girl realized something that few children discover so early. Beauty, courage, and dignity are priceless. They cannot be measured by labels, nor diminished by small words from small minds. She took a deep breath, as if filling her chest with a new, denser, more mature air, and, even without knowing it, he took the first steps of a journey that would change everything forever. The girl still did not move. His eyes, now hardened by the mixture of sadness and defiance, were still fixed on the shelves. She knew that, from then on, each choice would be different. Each decision would carry a little of that afternoon, that impact, that painful revelation about the world that awaited her outside. And without anyone noticing, a silent force grew within her, fueled not by the toys she couldn't have, but by the hidden truth she had just discovered. That greatness can't be bought, it's built, even if it costs more than most are willing to pay. And as the environment returned to its usual movement, with the sound of cash registers and distant laughter, she stood there, silently weaving the next pages of her story. The next action, even if small, would carry within itself all this new consciousness. And it was thus, in the scenario contrast and silent backstage, that something much greater began to be born. Still standing in front of that dollhouse that seemed to have a life of its own, the girl tried to find the strength to understand what had just happened. But the world didn't give him that time. It doesn't always work. The employee, who had already nailed the first wound, was not satisfied. It wasn't enough to just clip the girl's wings with a cruel phrase. She wanted more. I wanted to reinforce in front of everyone that certain limits should not be crossed by those who do not belong. Perhaps driven by a mindset of blind vanity, perhaps by a bitter need to assert herself at the expense of someone helpless, she decided to go further. Suddenly, he raised his voice. The cutting tone resounded through the aisles, reaching not only the girl, but also the other customers who, until then, had been following their purchases absent-mindedly. The atmosphere changed in a snap. The elegance of the store, hitherto so carefully preserved, was torn by the brutality of that moment. "Miss!" the employee shouted, her face marked by a hard, almost triumphant expression. "I will ask you to withdraw immediately. We don't want this environment to be devalued." The words, like stones thrown with force, ricocheted against the girl. In split seconds, all eyes turned to her. It was like being naked in a public square, exposed without defense, without any chance to protect herself. The girl, red with embarrassment, tried to sketch a step back, but her legs seemed stuck to the ground. She looked around, looking for an invisible escape, a hole where she could disappear and never be seen again. Her chest panted, and the tears, stubborn, began to well up in her eyes without her being able to stop her. The employee did not stop. As someone who finds pleasure in exposing weaknesses, she advanced, shortening the distance even more, like an accuser in a trial without the right to defense. This store is for real customers, not for curious people who can't afford to buy even a gift package, he said, with an icy smile that didn't hide the satisfaction of exercising his small power. The public humiliation was complete. Behind the scenes, other children watched, holding their parent hands, in uncomfortable silence. Some adults, caught by surprise by the violence of the situation, looked away, as if they did not want to commit, as if ignoring it could erase it. Others murmured among themselves, but no one moved. It was as if everyone was hostage to an uncomfortable truth. Sometimes cruelty happens right in front of our eyes, and yet we pretend not to see it. The girl, her face wet with silent tears, finally found the strength to move. She lowered her head, held the hem of her dress with both hands, and, with small and clumsy steps, walked to the exit. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the ground itself was trying to pull her down. It was the weight of shame, the weight of injustice, the cruel weight of the doors that close in the face of those who only wanted to look. The impact of that scene wasn't just about the humiliation itself. It was about the invisible scars that are born in moments like these, scars that shape the way someone sees themselves, and that often take years or a lifetime to reframe. Inside the girl, a whirlwind was forming. It wasn't just sadness. It was something deeper. It was a devastating feeling of being seen as nothing, of being treated as a mistake, as an unwanted presence on stage where only a few, chosen by the cold conventions of appearance, could shine. When she finally crossed the door of the store, the sun outside seemed to mock her sadness, shining nonchalantly, as if nothing had happened. But inside her, everything had changed. It was as if the universe had just made a brutal revelation. For some, it is not enough to fight. One must first survive the pain of being invisible, or worse, of being seen only to be rejected. And even in this moment of absolute fragility, while her small shoulders shook in silent sobs, the girl carried something that not even she herself knew, the seed of a powerful transformation, a force that was still hidden, dormant, but that one day would wake up with fury and light. Behind her, inside the store, customers slowly returned to their purchases, trying to erase the scene from memory, as if closing an uncomfortable book before the end. The employee straightened her hair with feigned serenity, as if she had fulfilled an honorable mission. Deep down, maybe I really believe that. Perhaps he believed that defending appearances was more important than welcoming a child who only wanted to dream. But life has its own backstage. It has its own way of charging, of revealing who we really are, away from the mirrors and the shop windows. And there, on that hot, noisy sidewalk, a girl with swollen eyes and stumbling steps began the hardest and most essential part of her journey. Nothing that had happened would be forgotten. Nothing would be in vain. Every look of contempt, every cutting word, every public humiliation would be kept, not as an open wound, but as fuel, like the living reminder that a person's worth is not measured by the etiquette of clothing, nor by the balance of the bank account, nor by the passing applause of those who think they have the right to judge. She didn't know it yet, but she carried within her a truth that would change the course of her history. No one can steal the dignity of those who choose to remain standing, even after being knocked down so many times. And it was with this strength, raw and silent, that she would take her next steps. As the girl walked away, swallowing hard the avalanche of feelings that no longer fit inside her, the store seemed to slowly return to its usual routine. But the truth is that the energy inside was no longer the same. Small signs of discomfort hung in the air, almost imperceptible to those who just looked at them. A silent tension, as if everyone knew deep down that something essential had been violated. It was in this scenario, between avoided looks and forced smiles, that he appeared, the owner of the store, a man whose presence was enough to change the environment, even without saying a single word. Tall, gray-haired, attentive gaze, he was the kind of person who didn't need to raise his voice to be respected. His posture conveyed a calm authority, built over years and not by titles or ostentations, but by the way he dealt with people and with the small, big decisions of everyday life. He was coming from the back, after a quick meeting with suppliers, when he felt the impact of the charged atmosphere that dominated the room. It didn't take an expert to realize that something very wrong had happened. It was an almost physical sensation, as if the air had become denser, more difficult to breathe. His eyes swept the room with the skill of someone who learned, behind the scenes of life, that the truth rarely presents itself explicitly. Sometimes, it is hidden in the details, in the embarrassed face of a customer, in the whisper of two employees trying to disguise their discomfort, in the unnecessary haste of an attendant who, in an attempt to appear busy, only opened up the desire to get away from something that bothered him deeply. It was there, in this tangle of almost invisible gestures, that the store owner knew, without needing explanations, that a line had been crossed. Something had happened that shouldn't have happened, and though no one said anything, the impact was undeniable, like a barely hidden secret pulsating at the center of it all. He was not the kind of man who made rash decisions. He had learned, along his journey, that acting moved only by the appearance of things was an invitation to commit even greater injustices. So his first impulse was to observe, to feel the environment, to put together the pieces of the silent puzzle that was unfolding before him. As he walked discreetly through the room, his gaze stopped on the employee who, a few minutes earlier, had starred in the shameful scene. She tried to look busy, rearranging products on the shelves with exaggeratedly precise movements, as if the arrangement of objects could erase the mess left in the emotions of the people around her. But it was impossible to hide the discomfort that trembled discreetly in his hands. The store owner also noticed the customers. Some, clearly, had not returned to the forced state of normalcy that she was trying to enact. There were whispers, exchanges of glances, and that kind of tense silence that doesn't need words to scream. He knew that there, in that instant, he was facing a decision that could change much more than the mood of the day. I was facing a turning point, one of those moments when the mindset of true leadership is tested, away from rehearsed speeches, away from the lights of appearance. And within him, the certainty grew that he needed to go beyond the surface. It wasn't just about maintaining the store's impeccable reputation. It was about honoring the kind of impact he always dreamed of leaving on the world. The one that transforms, that rescues, that builds bridges when human instinct insists on erecting walls. He felt, almost instinctively, that it was necessary to act, not with the blind fury that so many use to mask insecurities, but with the wisdom of one who understands that some hidden truths need to be brought to light so that they can be healed. It wasn't just a matter of business. It was a matter of essence. A question of choosing between sweeping the dirt under the rug or facing it with the dignity of someone who understands that every small decision shapes not just a company, but an entire culture, a collective mindset, a much greater truth. With firm but serene steps, he crossed the room, past the impeccable windows that seemed to lose their shine in the face of the recent shadow. His every move was accompanied by nervous, curious looks, disguised behind mechanical gestures. The tension was almost palpable. It was as if everyone somehow knew something was about to happen, something that perhaps could not be undone, something that would bring to light uncomfortable revelations about who they really were, about what they really valued, when the masks of social desirability fell. The owner of the store did not let himself be carried away by the rush. He knew that, to truly understand, it was necessary to listen beyond words, beyond obvious gestures. He needed to dive into the silent backstage of that story that, at that moment, pulsed stronger than any carefully selected ambient music. And it was in this dive that he captured something even deeper, something that many would pass up out of fear, self-indulgence, or simply an inability to see beyond appearances. The emptiness that spreads when injustice is not faced. It wasn't just about a humiliated child. It was about the kind of environment you allow yourself to build when you pretend not to see. It was about the invisible impact that marks every person present, even those who think they've been just harmless bystanders. Within him, a decision was formed. It was not based on impulse, nor on calculation. It was based on the responsibility he carried, the responsibility to choose to be, every day, the difference that is so demanded of others. As his eyes finally met the employees, he knew that a formal reprimand was not enough. Something much bigger was at stake. A transformation needed to happen, and not just for her, for everyone, to the store, for the culture that perpetuates itself in small actions, in silent gestures, behind the scenes of real life. The truth is, Sometimes life calls us to moments that test who we really are. And there, in that apparently ordinary hall, one of those moments was about to happen that leave no one unharmed. The store owner took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the choice he had to make. It wasn't just a correction. It was an opportunity. A rare opportunity to transform a painful mistake into something that could generate real impact, rebuild bridges, open doors where before there were only walls. And as he prepared to take the next step, he could hardly imagine how much that simple gesture, still in gestation, would carry with it the power to change not only that girl's story, but that of everyone who, even silently, had been touched by the hidden truth that hung in the air. Every second seemed to contain an eternity, as if time was holding its breath, waiting to see what would be the outcome of that invisible plot that now, finally, began to gain voice. The tension in the air was almost palpable. The store owner knew that he could not be carried away by impulses or hasty assumptions. He was not the type to make decisions without careful analysis, without understanding in depth what was really going on. There was something in the environment that wasn't right, and it needed to be resolved fairly. It was more than a matter of maintaining order in the store. It was a matter of values, of respect, of how he wanted everyone to feel inside. With quiet steps, he approached one of the most discreet employees, a young man who always proved to be calm, attentive, and reliable. The owner knew that he had a keen eye for detail, something he himself cherished. When the boy saw him approaching, his eyes changed from an expression of slight discomfort to a more tense posture, aware of the responsibility that the owner carried. He knew something serious was coming. Without fanfare, the owner lightly touched the young man's shoulder. The gesture was simple, but loaded with meaning. It was a discreet but clear call for an important conversation. The employee did not hesitate. He knew that his position was one of trust, and he was proud of it. He quickly got up and followed the owner to a farther corner, where the noise of the store and customers could not interfere. There, between shelves of well-organized products and a soft light that illuminated the environment, the owner stared at him. His eyes were serene, but at the same time relentless. He wasn't there to judge hastily, but he wasn't willing to leave anything unheeded either. "Tell me what happened today." The tone of his voice was not one of accusation, but rather of someone who knew there was more behind the actions, more than what the surface was showing. He was investigating, seeking the hidden truth, the essence of what really happened. The young man was silent for a moment. He knew that there was no way to hide the truth, especially not from someone so respected and just. The word seemed heavy, but he knew it was his duty to speak. It was the employee who was attending to the girl. Well, I guess something wasn't right with the situation. She seemed uncomfortable, and then began to treat the girl a little harshly. I tried to intervene, but it was too late. The girl was visibly upset, and the employee, he didn't seem to care. She was more concerned with her own frustration than with the client's well-being. The owner took a deep breath. It was not just an isolated error by an employee, but something deeper. He knew that a small act of disrespect could create a cascade of effects, slowly eroding the foundations of trust and humanity that he had worked so hard to cultivate inside. It was a failure that could not be ignored. "And you didn't notice anything before? Any sign that this could happen?" The owner asked more to understand than to accuse. The young man shook his head, visibly uncomfortable. "I realized, yes, that she was different today. But I thought it was just a moment of stress. I didn't imagine it would get to this point." The owner watched him for a few seconds, processing everything. He knew that things weren't always as simple as they seemed. A person's behavior is often an expression of something much bigger. What the young man had said made him reflect on the impact that episode would have not only on the girl, but on everyone who was there, involved in one way or another. Lack of respect is not something that is limited to an isolated moment. It reverberates, spreads, contaminates the entire environment. "I see." The owner paused, pondering the words he was going to say next. He wasn't the type to rush to conclusions. He knew that true leadership was not about shouting or punishing, but about correcting and guiding, always with fairness and transparency. He knew that respecting people was the basis of everything, and it will be no different with his employees. This will not go unnoticed. Everyone here is responsible for the atmosphere we create. And everyone has the freedom to express themselves, but also the obligation to treat others with respect. This is non-negotiable. The employee nodded, understanding the gravity of the moment. It was the raw truth, the one that was not always easy to swallow, but which brought with it the potential for transformation. The owner was not there to create an atmosphere of fear, but to establish the principles that guided that environment. He wanted everyone, customers and employees, to feel like they were in a place where respect and humanity were above all else. With a softer look, he continued, "Let's talk to her. It cannot be like that. If we want to build something lasting here, we need to address it clearly and honestly. It is not a matter of punishing, but of correcting. I need to understand what led to this. And if the situation is more serious than it seems, we will take the necessary measures." The young man, now calmer, understood that there was no intention to judge him, but to do things the right way. The store owner wasn't interested in hearing quick apologies or justifications. He wanted to understand what had really happened, the causes and effects. He knew that true transformation begins when people recognize their own mistakes, their failures, and look for a way to correct course. When the owner did a quick last analysis of the environment, he realized what was perhaps the most important point. Small actions of disrespect are not limited to a single act. They become the backdrop of the entire journey, silently weaving the character of the place. What he was doing at that moment was not just a matter of correcting a mistake. It was, in a way, planting the seeds of something deeper, a culture of respect that would one day become the soul of the place. Now, he knew he needed to dig deeper, understand the reason for the employee's behavior, and seek not just a correction, but a broader reflection on the choices everyone was making, including himself as a leader. As he left the conversation with the young employee, the owner took another deep breath. He was no longer just leading a store. He was, without realizing it, shaping something much bigger. A transformation that began there with small choices, with small attitudes. He was behind the scenes of this change, and he knew he needed more answers. It wouldn't be simple, but every step in the journey of true leadership is, first and foremost, a choice. And he was already deciding what his would be. The atmosphere in the store was tense, heavy. Every movement seemed amplified, as if time had slowed down, waiting for the moment when the truth would finally be brought to light. The store owner, with a sharp mind and firm posture, knew that this would not be just another day of work. Something was about to change inside, something that would reverberate not only among the employees, but in everyone who passed by the store in the coming days. He had already made a decision. The confrontation would be direct, without beating around the bush. He approached the employee with calm steps, but there was no denying the weight of his presence. The atmosphere, which until then had seemed fraught with uncertainty, now became clear and almost palpable. All eyes in the store were on them, and the tension was almost visible, like a cloud hovering above. The employee, who until that moment had seemed calm, was now visibly uncomfortable. Her rigid posture and tense countenance showed that she knew that the moment of truth had come. The owner stopped in front of her. There was no room for easy excuses or hasty justifications. He knew that the situation required an act of courage, not only on his part, but on the part of everyone involved. He took a deep breath and, with his characteristic calmness, asked, in a direct, almost surgical way, "Is it true that you expelled a child because he was poor?" The words, simple and direct, cut the air. There was no way to dodge. There was no way to hide. The silence in the store was total, and even customers, previously immersed in their purchases, were now attentive to their every move. The employee, completely speechless, hesitated for a moment. What could you say? How to justify such a cruel act? Shame seemed to consume her expression, but she still tried defense, a desperate attempt to justify the unjustifiable. I didn't mean it that way," she began, her voice trembling. It was a misunderstanding. The child was bothering the other customers. It had nothing to do with her situation. The owner watched her, but his expression did not soften. He knew, better than anyone, that empty words were not enough to wipe away the stain of such a great mistake. He took a step forward, his gaze fixed on her, undeviated. "So you thought that the social condition of that child justified the humiliation she suffered? Is that what you meant?" The employee opened her mouth to answer, but the words failed. What could she say? How could he argue against the truth, against the impassive gaze of the owner, who was there, relentless, waiting for an answer that would not come? Every attempt she made to justify herself seemed more like an attempt to escape the responsibility that lay before her. But she knew there was no escape. The people who were there, the ones who witnessed what happened, had seen enough. There was no more room to pretend. The owner did not look away. He knew he was at a critical moment. It was not a simple correction of an error. That was an opportunity for transformation. The impact of that moment would be felt far beyond that store. He knew that by exposing that error so clearly and publicly, he was not just correcting an individual flaw, but he was issuing a warning. He wanted everyone there to know that in his space, in the environment he had created with so much care, there was no room for prejudice. There was no room for actions that disrespected a human being in his essence. The employee, feeling the mounting pressure and public humiliation, tried once again to justify herself, but her voice was barely audible. She knew that, at that moment, her posture had been ruined. The room was silent, the weight of his actions now immortalized by the tension that had settled there. She wasn't just being scolded. She was facing the real consequence of her choices. The owner finally spoke again, but his words had a different weight now. These were not words of anger, but of an implacable truth. Here, everyone is treated with dignity, whatever their condition. Respect is the highest value we can offer, and I don't tolerate that being broken. No matter who you are or where you come from, everyone has the right to be treated with respect. There was something profound and transformative in what he said. They were not empty words, but a message that touched the hearts of all present. He wasn't just chasing an immediate solution to that incident. He was creating a legacy. He knew that that moment would become a milestone, a turning point in the behavior of everyone who passed by. He wanted no one ever again to forget the importance of respecting others, regardless of any factor. The employee, now speechless, simply looked down, defeated by the immensity of what she had caused. Shame was visible on his face. She knew that what had happened was not something that could be undone with an apology or a simple apology. The pain of that child, the humiliation of having been rejected by something that was beyond his control, could not be erased easily. The owner took a step back and looked around. What happened there was not just an isolated mistake. It was a reflection of what happened when the essential value of respect is neglected. He knew he had the power to change all that, to create a culture in his store where respect was not just an abstract concept, but the solid foundation of everything that happened there. True transformation does not come from empty words or merciless punishments. It comes from conscious action, from a deep understanding of the impact of our choices. "Now, let's fix it," he said, with a firmness that conveyed not only authority but the responsibility to lead justly. The employee had nothing more to say. She knew that her journey in that environment was about to take a new turn. She had the chance to learn, to reflect on what it really meant to respect others, and to start over. She didn't know it yet, but that moment would be the beginning of something important. The owner knew that if he had done it differently, perhaps that lesson would not have had the impact it needed to have. Change often begins in difficult moments, but it is exactly in these moments that true transformation can happen. Now, with the tension still palpable in the air, the owner knew that what had happened there would be marked in everyone's memory. The culture of the store, the way people treated each other, the trust he was trying to cultivate, all of that was at stake. He knew it would be a long road, but he also knew that nothing was worth it more than that. It was just the beginning of a deeper journey. True transformation would only happen when everyone, employees and customers, was willing to see the choices they made every day and understand the impact they had. The store owner was determined to make his store a different place, a place where respect was the basis of everything. The silence in the store had become almost deafening. The environment, which was once just a simple trade store, now seemed like a stage where something much bigger than any sales transaction or simple daily event took place. The owner, with his upright posture and steady gaze, knew that this was a time to act, the time to teach not only that employee, but everyone who was there, a lesson that went beyond the walls of the store and would reverberate in their hearts for a long time. He took a deep breath, not because he was going to hesitate, but because the gravity of the moment demanded a pause. The air, which had previously been heavy, now seemed to be filled with tension so dense that everyone around could feel it. The employee, already speechless and completely without room for defense, waited for the sentence that was already being formed in her mind. She knew, deep down, that what had happened could not be resolved with excuses or promises of change. That flaw was very deep. The owner, with the calmness that characterizes true leaders, looked directly at her, his eyes unresentful but relentless. His voice, when heard by everyone around, sounded not like an outburst of anger, but like a decree of justice. You can't go on working here. There is no place in our store for those who do not know how to treat others with dignity, respect, and humanity. I give you the opportunity to change, but that can't happen here. Not anymore. There was something striking about the way he spoke, as if his words had been forged by the very reality of the situation. He wasn't just firing an employee. He was setting a milestone. The lesson was clear and irreversible. It was not a matter of punishment, but of a reaffirmation of values. He would not allow the store to become a space where respect was optional. It was not a matter of simple convenience or mistake that could be forgiven and forgotten, but rather a moral choice that had to be made. When he said those words, a shiver ran down the spine of everyone who was there. Many felt relieved, others ashamed. But deep down, everyone understood that that action needed to be taken so that the space where there was not just another commonplace, but a reflection of something bigger, an environment of true transformation. The impact of the owner's decision would be felt by everyone, not only at that moment, but in the weeks and months to come. He had shown that, in his establishment, human dignity was non-negotiable. The employee, who until a few minutes had seemed confident and even a little defensive, was now visibly shaken. His expression, which had previously been one of certain pride, was now one of silent despair. She tried to find words, tried once again to justify her action, but the weight of her own choices was greater than any words that could come out of her mouth. It was too late for regrets. The owner looked around, as if he were also registering, absorbing the impact of his decision. He knew that this scene, this moment, would be marked in everyone's minds. There was no turning back. From that moment on, everyone there was being challenged to look inside and reflect on their own behaviors, their own choices. What was acceptable before was now unthinkable. He made a discreet gesture, signaling to the employee that she should leave. There was no need for more words. The impact was already made, and the lesson, although difficult to absorb at that moment, would begin to expand and take root in the mind of each one who was there. When respect is broken, there is no more room for harmonious coexistence. Actions have consequences, and that's what people need to understand. The store, as much as it had been marked by that incident, was now a new space. Each one there, seeing what was happening, began to understand that the values of respect, dignity, and humanity needed to be the basis of everything. The owner knew that his attitude would not only be a correction of a mistake, but a transformation of mentality. He was shaping the future, and that little episode was a key that would open doors to a new reality within the store and, perhaps, even beyond. He then turned to remaining officials with a gaze that, while relentless in its justice, conveyed a greater sense of responsibility. Whoever here does not share the values that sustain this place also has no space here, he said, and everyone understood. It was a silent revelation, but full of strength. He was not just talking about a specific employee, but about everyone collectively. The owner was doing something much deeper than punishing someone. He was creating a culture, a mindset that could not be corrupted by negative attitudes. The transformation that began that day wasn't just about layoffs or corrections. It was about decisions. It was about defining what is accepted and what is fought. The journey of that space, of what it represented and of the people who would pass through it, would never be the same again. The impact of his decision would reverberate on everyone who decided to work there, or even on those who chose to visit the store. They were all being guided by something bigger, something you don't see every day, something that everyone would carry within themselves and pass on as a lesson that could not be forgotten. By doing so, the owner was not only punishing an employee for her mistake, but he was establishing a new pattern of behavior that would transcend the walls of the store. What he did there was not a simple act of justice. It was a manifesto. He was making it clear that this was not just a company, but a space where integrity, respect, and dignity were paramount. And these values, he knew, were non-negotiable. And while the atmosphere was still dense, with everyone reflecting on what happened, the owner knew that, deep down, the impact of his actions would not only be immediate. The impact would come, yes, in a subtle but powerful way. People will begin to understand that in a place where respect is a foundation, real transformations can happen. He was just beginning to build something lasting, and he was willing to fight for it. He knew he was not only creating a culture in the store, but also a mindset that would slowly begin to transform the people and environment around him. This would be a milestone in the journey of everyone there. The owner, after making the decision, felt that there was something more to do, something that would transcend the firmness of his previous attitude, something that would touch even deeper, not only those directly involved, but also those who were just watching. He couldn't let the situation go on without giving the girl the kind of response she deserved. He knew that, deep down, this was not just a question of justice or enforcing rules, but of humanity. It was about what it really means to be human, in fact. He turned quickly, intending to correct what seemed like an invisible glitch, but which was consuming the environment. It wasn't enough to just be firm with the employee. The impact of that child needed to be treated with more than words. He saw her running out of the store, her face marked by sadness, the tears he couldn't hide, and the sound of her quickening breathing. She was running away from pain, running away from something that seemed unfair, running away from a world that, at that moment, seemed to have no room for her. The owner followed in his footsteps, with a sense of urgency that he couldn't explain, but he knew that something inside him was asking for it. He found her leaning against a wall, her face now covered with her hands, as if trying to block the impact of what she had just experienced. The scene, for a brief moment, paralyzed his feelings. He wasn't just reacting to a mistake someone had made. He was acknowledging the fragility of that situation, the girl's innocence, and his responsibility to turn it into something positive. He approached her cautiously, unhurriedly, as if respecting the other's pain. Her gaze, still lost, met his, and for the first time that day, something genuine shone in the girl's eyes. She watched him, not knowing exactly what to expect, not knowing if he would come up with more accusations, or, perhaps, with the same coldness that many adults have when faced with a mistake. But the owner, with an open heart, knelt in front of him, in a gesture that seemed to restore hope for something greater. He knew that this moment had the power to heal or hurt even more, and he was determined that it would be a healing. With a tenderness that few could show in such a situation, he said, "I'm sorry, my dear. What happened there was not fair to you. No child, no human being should be treated this way. I understand that you were scared, upset, and rightly so." He paused for a moment to allow his words to have the effect he so desired, so that the girl would feel that her pain had been understood in a real, true way. His tone was soft, but charged with moral authority. He wasn't there to fix a mistake with excuses alone, but to give a lesson in humanity, something she would take with her far beyond that day. She, initially silent, looked at him with teary eyes, trying to understand what was happening. Surprise was still stamped on his face, as it was not possible that an adult, someone who represented authority, had done what he had done. He invited her back to the store, with the same kindness he showed in his words. "Would you like to come back and enjoy the good things we have here? Not as someone who was sent away, but as someone who is respected and welcomed like anyone else." The invitation was made in a simple way, but the weight of those words could not be underestimated. It was more than an offer to return to the store. It was a gesture of revaluation. It was about giving the girl back the dignity she deserved, restoring her confidence in the world around her. He didn't just want to correct his employee's attitude. He wanted to ensure that the girl knew that the world was not limited to situations of injustice and pain, that there was also compassion, kindness, and transformation. The girl looked at him, her countenance softening little by little. She hesitated for a moment, as if she were still afraid to believe that it was real. The pain in her eyes began to subside, and she took a small step forward, as if confidence was slowly returning. The owner, realizing what was happening, reached out, and this simple but meaningful gesture was what completed that moment. I promise you'll never go through something like this here again. You have every right to be here and to be treated with the utmost respect. So how about we go back? The store is full of good things, and I want you to enjoy all of it without any fear or insecurity. He invited her back in a way that went beyond the physical, beyond the store space. He was inviting her into a new kind of relationship where respect was not the exception, but the rule. The girl, with a shy but sincere smile, accepted the invitation. She held the owner's hand, and together they walked back inside the store. As they walked, the owner reflected on what had just happened. He knew that, in that moment, what he had done was not just to correct an injustice, but so something much deeper, a change in mentality of everyone present. He had shown that as much as the world was sometimes unfair and cruel, it was still possible to correct the course of things. There was still the chance to make things right, even when pressure and error seemed to dominate. And as they entered the store, something seemed to change in the air. Not only the girl, but everyone present felt that something was changing, as if the environment was becoming lighter, more welcoming. The impact of the owner's actions was spreading. He wasn't just fixing a specific mistake. He was creating a space of transformation. And that day would be remembered by all as a day when something powerful happened, something that could not be explained in words alone, but that would be felt for a long time. He knew that the path of transformation was just beginning. As they walked back inside the store, the owner felt a weight being lifted from his shoulders. It wasn't just a resolution of a mistake, but something deeper was happening there, a quiet but powerful transformation that reverberated in every step he took. He knew that the situation with the girl was not yet completely resolved, that her reaction was only the first layer of something that still needed to be healed. But he felt that in that moment, he was doing more than fixing something wrong. He was creating a new beginning. He was planting a seed that, in time, would bear fruit. When they arrived at the store, the atmosphere seemed different. There was no longer that tension in the air, nor the discomfort of unspoken words. The environment was lighter, more open. The people who were there watching, still watching the situation unfold, now looked at it with a new perspective. What seemed to be a simple matter of correcting behavior had turned into something more meaningful, a lesson in dignity, respect, and humanity. The girl, previously so distant and so far from the situation, now seemed calmer. His gaze, which had previously been one of pain and incredulity, began to shine again. Something had changed inside her. The owner knew that her reaction, the acceptance of what was happening, was a consequence of the gesture he had just made. He did not treat her as a victim, but as a person worthy of respect and, more importantly, worthy of a better future. She looked at him, and he could see the question in her eyes. She was still trying to understand, to process what was happening, as if the situation was too surreal to be real. He smiled sincerely, trying to convey more than words could say. He wanted her to know, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that this moment was about more than the correction of an injustice. It was about giving her back something she might have lost, trust in the kindness of others, in people's ability to do the right thing, to take care of each other. And then something happened, something that, in a way, was the key to sealing everything that was going on there. The owner, with a gentle smile, approached one of the store's highest shelves, where the most expensive toy was, an item that drew attention not only for its quality, but also for the brightness that emanated from its rarity. He turned to the girl, who was still observing everything, with a lightness that he knew the child needed at this moment. Without hesitation, he took the toy in his hands and approached her. "I think this is for you," he said with a soft smile, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. He was talking about the toy, of course, but his words transcended the simple act of giving a gift. He was, at that moment, reaffirming to the girl that she had value, that she deserved to be treated with dignity, that what had happened before did not define who she was. The girl looked at him, astonished. Her eyes immediately lit up. But there was something else there, a sense of gratitude, a renewed hope, as if this gift was a symbol that something good could still come no matter the circumstances. The twinkle in her eye wasn't just about the toy itself, but about the meaning behind it. It was the expression of a child who, for a brief moment, was sure that the world could be different, that people could act with kindness, and that justice, although often late, was still possible. He didn't charge anything for that, of course. There was no price that could be given to this type of transformation. The owner knew that by doing that, he wasn't just giving a toy to a child. He was giving him something more valuable than any material object. He was offering her a new perspective, a new chance to see the world, people, and even herself in a more hopeful way. He was showing her that she would not be defined by a situation of injustice, but by the way she could respond to it, by the strength she still had within her to move forward. The girl, now with the toy in hand, could not contain her happiness. She looked at him with an expression of pure gratitude, and for the first time that day, she smiled. It was not a shy or forced smile, but a genuine smile charged with emotion. She knew that this gift was more than just a toy. It was a reward for their dignity, for their ability to endure pain, and for the possibility of a better future. It was a reflection of her strength, her resilience, and the impact that those moments of kindness had made. The owner, observing the sparkle on her face, felt that, at that moment, he had achieved something that could not be measured by numbers or in a simple balance of accounts. He had touched a person's life in a deep and true way. He hadn't just corrected wrong. He had created something bigger, an opportunity for that child to believe in a fairer, kinder, more humane world. But the transformation was not limited to her. Everyone who was present, even if silent, was now witnessing something far greater than a simple gesture of kindness. They were witnessing a lesson in humanity, a lesson in how the actions of a single person can reverberate and transform not just a situation, but the mindset of everyone around. The owner knew that it would not be easy, that the path to change was not always simple or fast. But at that moment, he was doing what he knew was right. And as the girl walked away with the toy in her hands, the owner felt an inner peace, knowing that he had, in fact, done something meaningful. Her journey, like the rest of us, was just beginning. She was beginning to understand that despite the hardships and adversities, there was still a chance to transform her destiny. Hope was there, palpable and renewed, and that child's smile was the greatest reward of all. The owner moved away a little, watching her play with the toy. He knew that that day would not be forgotten by her, nor by him, and that, from now on, their journey would continue, with more confidence, more compassion, and, perhaps, more wisdom about what really matters in life. As the girl walked away, hugging the toy that the owner gave her, there was something deeper going on, something that could not be touched, but that was being felt by everyone in the store. The transformation that had begun with a simple error in judgment extended far beyond the immediate gesture of rectifying the situation. That child now carried with him a memory that would be marked forever, and the owner of the store, more than anyone, knew that he had done the right thing. However, he also understood that something bigger was at stake there, something that touched not only her life, but everyone around her. Have you ever stopped to think about the impact that our attitudes can have on someone else's life? Every gesture, every word, every look carries with a possibility of transformation. It can be a transformation for the good, as we have seen here, or it can be a change into something much more painful. The difference is in our choices. And if there's one thing that this moment teaches us, it is that kindness can often be the key that unlocks the best version of the other and even of ourselves. The girl, with her new toy, was not just carrying an object. She was carrying something much more significant, the recognition of her humanity, her dignity, and, above all, her worth. Those attitudes of the store owner, the understanding look, the gesture of humility, the way he gave a new start, turned a simple commercial exchange into a real-life lesson. Because, let's be honest, kindness doesn't cost anything. A smile, a kind word, a gesture of understanding, a sincere apology, all of this is such a low cost, but the impact is indescribable. How many times have we failed to do something simple, but that would make a big difference in someone's life, just because of pride, laziness, or lack of reflection? And what does it cost us? What does unkindness cost us? The loss of an opportunity to do good, the opportunity to connect with someone in a true way, the opportunity to change a life. However, unkindness can cost us much more than we realize. It can destroy relationships, push away those we love, weaken trust in the people around us, and worst of all, prevent us from growing as human beings. Lack of kindness costs us humanity, which makes us more distant from each other, more disconnected, and eventually more alone. So the message here is clear. Kindness costs nothing, but the lack of it can cost everything. And the most painful thing is that, many times, we don't realize how much we are missing out on earning until it's too late. Imagine how many situations, like the one we saw in the store, can be corrected with a simple gesture of empathy, affection, respect. The transformation that the store owner brought to the girl was not only an act of kindness, but a real change of mentality. He understood that at that moment, it was not just a matter of correcting an injustice, but of restoring a person's dignity, of allowing them to see the world in a different way. He made the right choice, not out of obligation, but because he knew that in doing so, he was creating an impact that went beyond the immediate. The lesson here goes beyond the simple action of giving something material. It goes to the heart of how we relate to others. Each of us has the power to change someone's day with a simple gesture. We are not talking about great heroic deeds, but small daily acts that can make all the difference. By acting with empathy, respect, and the ability to see the other in their entirety, we are unknowingly shaping the future of these people. And at the same time, we are shaping our own future. It is an invitation to reflection. How are we treating the people around us? How many times are we quick to judge, to criticize, to let pride and haste take the place of understanding and kindness? What do we lose when we do this? What could we gain if we just decided to be kinder? More gifts? More human? The truth is that the impact of our actions reverberates much farther than we imagine. Now, imagine that instead of acting harshly, every time we have an opportunity to treat someone humanely, we decide to do so. The domino effect that could emerge from these small changes would be surprising. The child who receives kindness, the friend who is listened to with empathy, the coworker who feels support. All these gestures, even the simplest ones, have a transformative power. Not only do they change the life of the person who receives them, but they also transform our own journey. This is a great revelation. When we act with kindness, we are not only doing good for the other, we are also doing good for ourselves. True connection, the feeling of being on the same human level, the feeling of empathy and compassion, make us richer emotionally and spiritually. We are enriching our lives and at the same time enriching the lives of those who cross our path. And this leads us to a hidden truth that we often overlook: the value of a simple gesture of kindness. We cannot underestimate the impact our words and actions have on another. They can be the difference between a day full of despair and a day full of hope. They can change the course of life. And in the end, it is these small transformations that build a better, more humane and fairer world. Now look at your surroundings. Look at the people you interact with every day. How many simple gestures of kindness can you offer? How many opportunities do you have to transform someone's day? Each of us, in our daily lives, has the power to change lives in a silent but profound way. And you don't have to be big, famous, or influential to do that. True transformation begins in the small attitudes, in the daily choices we make when interacting with others. This is the journey we are all living. And somehow, we can all make a difference. Because at the end of the day, kindness is not just a gift to others. It is also a gift to ourselves. It teaches us to see the humanity in the other, invites us to reflect on our own actions, and allows us to grow in a more meaningful way. As we reflect on all of this, we are reminded that the moment kindness becomes a part of our DNA, we not only change our lives, but we also transform the world around us. And that, my friends, is a journey worth following. True change starts with ourselves. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment and share it with someone who needs to remember the power of kindness. Subscribe to the channel for more exciting stories like this.